In a battle between an entire unit of Russian soldiers and a single Ukrainian robot, you would likely expect the Russian soldiers to win. Sure, the unit might suffer a few losses along the way, but one robot against multiple soldiers is the sort of disadvantage that Russia thrives on. Having bigger numbers has always been Russia's advantage, but as Ukraine has shown repeatedly throughout the war, Russia doesn't seem to be able to make its numerical advantage count. You can already guess where this is heading. Russia's unit didn't win. Ukraine's robot just wiped out that entire unit, causing catastrophic losses that will humiliate Vladimir Putin while showing just how far Ukraine's ground-based robot technology has come. On January 7th, United 24 media reported on a remarkable operation carried out by the NC-13 Robotic Strike Company of Ukraine's 3rd Army Corps. Codenamed Alphabet, the operation saw the strike company send a single robot laden with anti-tank mines to a Russian position. The results were as explosive as you might expect, as the mines detonated and wiped out the majority of the entrenched Russian soldiers. All that Ukraine had to do after that was send infantry to secure the cleared position. Russia never saw the drone's explosive payload coming. Now it knows that it has a whole new problem to deal with on the front lines. The 3rd Army Corps took to Telegram to explain what it had done, along with sharing a video that documented how the operation came to be and how it was executed. This is footage of a successful operation by the fighters of the 3rd Army Corps, as a result of which the enemy group was destroyed and our infantry occupied the liberated area, the Corps said when introducing its video. The Corps added, despite the difficult terrain and attempts to defeat it by enemy FPVs, the professional GRC operators traveled 20 kilometers and delivered 12 mines directly to the shelter with the occupiers. GRC is the Ukrainian abbreviation for Ground Robotic Complex, which refers to their unmanned ground vehicles. The message being delivered here is that Ukraine has figured out how to overcome one of the major problems that stand in the way of ground robots. Not only did this one robot traverse 20 kilometers, or about 12.4 miles of rough terrain, but it did so laden with a dozen heavy anti-tank mines. We don't know if that says more about the stealth capabilities of the robot or Russia's complete inability to see a fairly large ground robot coming. It doesn't really matter. The explosive results show us that Ukraine has a new strategy that it can use against Russian forces that hide away rather than watch what's happening on the battlefield. The video, also shared by Pravda, that accompanied the 3rd Army Corps' message is a tub-thumping spectacle. Aptly set to the pounding song Thunderstruck by AC/DC, it kicks off with the visual of Ukraine's ground robot reaching its target and exploding. From there, we see what are presumably members of the NC-13 Robot Strike Company preparing the anti-tank mines used in the attack and moving their robot into position. We also get some insight into how the company operates the robot, as the video shows shots of a full computer-based setup in a hidden location that drone operators use to steer their robot to the Russian position. The video also showcases footage shot from the perspective of the ground robot itself, along with an aerial view of the strike captured by what is presumably a reconnaissance drone. The drone is seen to be controlled by what looks like a typical video game controller, which is interesting in its own right. Ukraine has made even its most technologically advanced robots so easy to control that the average Call of Duty player would probably be able to get the gist of what they need to do as soon as that controller is placed in their hands. However, perhaps the most interesting thing about this strike is the weapon that Ukraine's ground robot delivered. Anti-tank mines, specifically the TM mines that United 24 media says were loaded onto the robot, don't seem to be the most natural weapon to use. After all, the clue is in the name. These mines are supposed to be buried in areas where Ukraine expects Russian tanks to roll, not delivered to the doorstep of entrenched Russian soldiers who believe that they're safe from Ukraine's fury. But then that's the genius of what Ukraine pulled off. Ever able to come up with the unexpected, Ukraine has once again found a way to adapt a weapon that it has readily available into one that can destroy Russian soldiers in ways that those troops could never expect. Perhaps Ukraine's use of anti-tank mines shouldn't be all too surprising. On January 7th, Forbes contributor Vikram Mittal wrote that the TM62 anti-tank mine, a variant of which may well be the type that the NC-13 Robotic Strike Company used in its attack, has become something of an all-purpose weapon for Ukraine. The mine, which was first fielded by the Soviet Union in the early 1960s, is one of the most widely used anti-tank mines in the world. That probably means good things for Ukraine, as this fact alone suggests that Ukraine may have plenty of this particular mine in its stockpiles. Green in color and with a 32 cm or 12.5 inch diameter, the TM62 is packed with 7.5 kilograms or about 16.5 pounds of high explosives. Assuming this is the mine that Ukraine's ground robot carried a dozen of, that means that the strike that the NC-13 Robotic strike company pulled off involved 90 kilograms or almost 200 pounds of explosives. Ukraine is now building its own version of the TM62, which it has dubbed the TM-2025. Though seemingly identical to the older Soviet mine at a glance, this new version has a few interesting tweaks. For one, parts of it are 3D printed, which allows Ukraine to make and deploy these mines cheaply and quickly. However, it's the new fuses that have transformed this particular mine into such a dangerous weapon. In addition to a new electromechanical fuse, Ukraine's TM-2025 contains a secondary fuse, a fuse that allows for remote detonation, Mittal points out. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how this modified TM mine could be useful when carried by a ground robot to a Russian position. All that Ukraine has to do is get the robot where it needs to be and then push a button. The massive explosion does the rest, just as we saw in Ukraine's January strike. Mittal says that Ukraine has been using TM62s or perhaps TM2025s as munitions dropped by drones and as satchel charges, in addition to continuing to use them as landmines. By repurposing a single munition as a landmine, an improvised aerial delivered weapon, or a satchel charge, Ukrainian and Russian units reduce logistical demand while maintaining operational tempo under austere conditions, Mittal writes, in a statement that reveals that Russia is also getting creative with its anti-tank mines. But it's not Russia that's using ground robots to deliver those mines. That's all Ukraine, and this most recent strike showcases how adaptable Ukraine is and how versatile a seemingly simple weapon like an anti-tank mine can be when it's placed into the right hands. By the way, Ukraine getting creative with how it uses its mines is nothing new. Back in May 2025, we published a video revealing how Ukraine has figured out an insane mine hack that enables it to wipe out Russia's motorcycle-mounted troops. Find out more about that hack in our video. Returning to Ukraine's new ground robot land mine delivery tactic, the 3rd Army Corps explains exactly what this strike means for the future of Ukraine's fight against Russia. It describes what its soldiers just pulled off as the new reality of war. And this new reality is one where ground robots that might never have been conceived if Putin didn't launch his invasion are now destroying entire Russian units in one strike. It's a new reality that Russia won't have been expecting. After all, Ukraine had been using ground robots for a very different purpose until recently. Back in November 2025, the BBC published an article in which it reported on Ukraine's use of ground robots in the Pokrovsk region. Far from being the deliverers of death that the NC-13 Robotic strike company showed that they can be in January, these ground robots were instead offering a lifeline to Ukrainian troops who would otherwise be trapped by Russia's constant assaults on the Donetsk-based city. BBC said that as Russia's forces attempted to cut Ukraine's Pokrovsk defenders off from the logistical arteries that deliver their food and ammunition, ground robots were becoming a savior. Their use eliminates the need for a soldier to transport supplies, which is dangerous work that could result in that soldier being killed if they're spotted by a Russian drone. Instead, ground robots, which are also known as unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, offer the same transportation with no risk to human life. The robot is small enough to squeeze into a bicycle lane and looks like a mini tank without a turret, the BBC wrote of one ground robot operating in Pokrovsk. UGVs are difficult to spot. They're harder to jam than an aerial drone, and most importantly, soldiers can operate them remotely from a safer location. By the time of the publication of the BBC's article, 90% of all supplies for Ukraine's Pokrovsk frontline forces were being delivered by ground robots. Such logistical uses seem obvious for ground drones. However, it hasn't taken long for Ukraine and Russia to adapt what were once basic UGVs for a host of battlefield missions. In a December 28th article for Forbes, Mittal notes that technological and operational advances in ground robotics have lagged behind those seen in air and sea-based drones. But the use of ground robots is increasing, and both Ukraine and Russia were starting to field more of them as the war approached 2026. Mittal notes the use of these robots as logistical tools and as vehicles that can be used to evacuate casualties from the front lines. He also points out that Ukraine and Russia have both developed smaller ground robots of the tracked, wheeled, and even quadruped varieties. These robots have the same advantage of being difficult to spot, as the BBC pointed out, and that means they may be especially useful for intelligence gathering. We know from the video of the NC-13 Robotic strike company's attack on Russia's unit shared by the 3rd Army Corps that at least some ground robots have the ability to capture footage of the battlefield around them. Imagine that capability installed in a robot that can sequester itself away among leaves and other debris, where it constantly films unaware Russian soldiers, and you get an idea of why these UGVs can be such a useful spying tool. How much Ukraine might be using UGVs for this purpose is unclear, Mittal says, and that makes sense. Why give away what you're doing by shouting about your use of spy robots from the rooftops? Other UGVs are being turned into weapons platforms, which may well be the most important evolution of the technology. Mittal points to one example in which a droid TW-12.7 UGV managed to hold a Ukrainian position against a Russian advance for a shocking 45 days. Acting as a mobile weapon platform, the system was used by Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade to fill a gap in the Ukrainian lines in Kharkiv Oblast, Mittal writes. He adds that this ground robot has since been modified so that it can carry a 40mm grenade launcher. That's a little different from the mines that the NC-13 Robotic strike company used, but the explosive potential is much the same. Ukraine is also working on integrating its ground-based platforms with its aerial drones, and he noted that Russia is trying to use its UGVs to lay mines. The point being made here is that the obvious logistical uses of ground robots only scratch the surface of their true potential. Ukraine is now attempting to realize that full potential, especially in terms of UGVs as an attacking force, and the Russian unit that was just destroyed by one of these robots shows that Ukraine is succeeding. Ukraine knows how valuable these ground robots can be, and it's going all in on using them. In a January 7th article, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that almost 15,000 UGVs were delivered to the Ukrainian military in 2025, and that there are plans to increase this number to the delivery of over 20,000 in 2026. Ukraine has also been using its Brave One defense tech innovation platform, which is a military tech marketplace that links soldiers with prospective equipment manufacturers to encourage ground robot development. The New Voice of Ukraine says that 270 Ukrainian companies are now developing UGVs via this platform, and that 70 of these systems that these companies have come up with have already been codified, meaning they're standardized and ready for use by Ukraine's military. By October 2025, ground robots had delivered nearly 300 tons of cargo for Ukraine, which is a statistic that aligns well with the BBC's claims of 90% of all supplies being delivered to the front lines of Pokrovsk being carried by UGVs. It seems that Ukraine is well on its way to both achieving and exceeding its target of building and acquiring 30,000 ground robots, which is a number that the National Interest reported on November 15th. That outlet repeated Ukraine's intention to field up to 15,000 ground robots by the end of 2025, adding that these robots can cost as little as $10,000, though more advanced UGVs can set Ukraine back $50,000 or more. Even that higher price tag is a pittance to pay for Ukraine if it means that it gets its hands on technology that saves soldiers and is increasingly capable of causing massive losses among Russia's forces. Still, this technology has a long way to go. We mentioned earlier that ground robots lag behind Ukraine's aerial and sea-based unmanned vehicles, and we can see how far behind they are due to comments made by statistics shared by the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi. Business Insider reports Syrskyi is stating that ground robots were responsible for just 0.66% of all drone missions carried out by Ukraine in November 2025. Unmanned aerial vehicles still account for the bulk of Ukraine's drone usage, with Syrskyi noting that these types of drones are responsible for about 60% of all the strikes that Ukraine conducts against enemy targets. Does this mean that ground robots aren't as useful as they appear? Quite the contrary. This low usage suggests that it's taken Ukraine a while to solve the terrain-based issues that ground robots face. Now these problems are being solved and the true versatility of the UGVs has become apparent. Ukraine is likely to increase the number of missions in which these robots participate. 0.66% isn't indicative of a useless technology. It's a number that showcases just how much room for growth there is in Ukraine's developing UGV sector, and that should worry Russia in the wake of one of its units being obliterated by just one of these robots carrying a load of a dozen mines. Beyond their utility, there's another reason why Ukraine will be excited by its own latest UGV developments. Manpower is becoming a problem for Ukraine, and it's a problem that UGVs may be able to solve. Part of Ukraine's manpower challenge lies in the fact that Russia is simply capable of fielding more soldiers than Ukraine. Russia is the larger of the two countries, and its military reflects that fact. Back in September, RBC Ukraine reported on comments that Syrskyi made suggesting that Russia enjoys a manpower advantage of 3-1 in many contested regions, and that advantage can rise as high as 6-1 in some areas. Ground robots aren't being produced anywhere near the quantities needed to even up those numbers. However, they do offer Ukraine options in terms of sending robots in to do what was once humans' work, which in turn preserves soldiers who might have otherwise become casualties in the fight against Russia. The other aspect of Ukraine's manpower issues lies in how it's becoming increasingly difficult for the country to recruit new soldiers after almost 4 years of a brutal and grinding war. Some, such as former Ukrainian sniper team commander in Ukrainian Special Forces unit Konstantin Brzezinski, claimed that far too few of Ukraine's recruits even make it to the front lines. The news outlet Military Affairs reported on comments made by Brzezinski in November, which saw the former sniper commander claim that of 30,000 people drafted toward the end of 2025, over 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers left their units of their own accord, leaving behind around 9,000 who were still fighting. As a result, brigades appear fully staffed on paper, but a large share of their personnel is absent in practice, the outlet reports, before adding a terrifying coda. Brzezinski estimated that despite the declared 30,000 reinforcements, only 2,000 to 3,000 actually reached the line of contact. Assuming these statements are true, then only a tenth of those that Ukraine claims is recruiting are actually fighting in the areas where they're needed. Such issues are compounded by many of Ukraine's young people leaving the country for elsewhere in Europe. That's according to Kyiv's mayor and former heavyweight champion boxer Vitaly Klitschko, who Politico reports as outright stating that Ukraine has huge problems with soldiers. Kyiv's mayor suggests that may lie in Ukraine's mobilization age limits, stating, "In the past, 18-year-olds served in the army, but those are kids. Right now you can only be mobilized in Ukraine from age 25. You could lower it by a year or two to 23 or 22. Along with these mobilization issues, Politico says that European Union countries granted 79,000 new temporary protection decisions to Ukrainian people in September 2025 alone. That was both the highest number in 2 years and an indicator that there are many Ukrainians who are looking to escape rather than serve in the country's military. Again, the 30,000 to 35,000 UGVs that Ukraine hopes to have by the end of 2026 won't solve these manpower issues. They'll help. Plus, there aren't many soldiers who are going to be willing to strap 12 anti-tank mines to their backs before charging a Russian position. That's a robot's job, if ever there was one, and Ukraine showed in January that it's now capable of using just one ground robot to do the same kind of damage that would normally require an entire unit of soldiers. Even as Ukraine's ground robots start grabbing headlines, we can't ignore the massive impact that the country's aerial drones continue to have. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces claims that these drones inflicted an estimated $20 billion of damage against Russia in the 7 months leading up to January 2026, and Ukraine has started the new year in much the same vein. Long-range strikes aplenty are targeting key Russian assets, as you'll learn if you watch our video on Ukraine's recent strike against Russia's Energia defense plant. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest and most innovative attacks against Russia. And thank you for watching.